Think about that special someone in your life. Good. Now push them aside and focus on you. Isn't it time you treated yourself to what could be hundreds of dollars in savings on your car insurance by switching to Geico? Don't you want to join the other 4 million drivers who switched last year? Contact Geico today for a free rate quote and show yourself how much you care about yourself.
For a free rate quote, visit geico.com or call 1-800-947-AUTO. 15 minutes could save you hundreds on car insurance.
Blog Talk Radio.
Just Energy with naturopath and medical intuitive Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theories that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swing of a pendulum to the waves in the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. In the same way, things such as rocks and minerals vibrate very slowly and at speeds that are imperceptible to us. Living things such as plants, animals, and man vibrate faster and appear to be alive. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is if we take everything in our own universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita as she explores questions such as, what are we made of? Why do we get sick? How can I live a more balanced and whole life? Call in and talk to her and her thought-provoking guest. Send us your questions and get the help you need to move beyond any obstacle or challenges that may be affecting your life, right from the source. So stay tuned and explore your possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. Wow, what a remarkable lineup we have today. In the first hour, we're going to be talking to James Twyman. Our topic is Awaken to Your Divine Purpose, and we're going to be talking about two of his books. One is The Moses Code, and I don't know, I got a bunch of questions for that one. And then the second one is his new book, The Barn Dance, and we're going to get to that. And in the second hour, as promised, we have former Governor Jesse Ventura talking about what the government doesn't want you to know. Kind of an interesting combination, I guess, kind of spiritual and uplifting, totally conspiracy theory. Interesting combination, but you just never know here at Just Energy Radio. As you know, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's AppliedEnergeticsInstitute.com, where you can become an energy medicine practitioner, intuitive counselor, or medical intuitive, all from the comfort of your own home. Just Energy Radio is also broadcasted on Fate Radio and can be heard on iTunes and selected episodes on YouTube. So let me tell you a little bit about James, and we'll get him on the air because we have a lot to talk about. James Twyman is an internationally renowned best-selling author, filmmaker, and musician who has a reputation for traveling to some of the world's greatest areas of conflict, sharing his message about peace. He has been called the Peace Troubadour and has performed his peace concert in countries like Iraq, Northern Ireland, South Africa, Bosnia, and Serbia, drawing millions of people together in prayer to influence events of world crisis. So please welcome to Just Energy Radio from JamesTwyman.com, James Twyman. Hey, James, thanks for coming on the show today.
It is my pleasure. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I hear that you're going to be in Dallas in May. How exciting. I'm a Dallas person.
Yeah,
I'm
excited
to Dallas.
Exactly. I'm excited for a big Texas tour. Going to be in Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and then Austin area. And just really looking forward to being back there because I was in most of those places last year when we had the Barn Dance coming out, and the response was so fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to being back and sharing even deeper with people.
Great. It is just so exciting. I don't want to say that Dallas is the hub of metaphysical, but it's always exciting when people of your caliber, kind of fly through. I'm like, ooh, we're on the map. Well, like concert tours, they do New York, Los Angeles. you know, on a good day they hit Dallas, you know, so it's like, woohoo, we're on the map.
Well, I have
James,
personally found Dallas to be a wonderful spot with a lot of very profound people who are living this message, who are really committed to this amazing unfolding that we see taking place everywhere we look. Humanity is waking up, and I've seen and experienced that to a very big extent there in Dallas. I have some dear friends who are there who I know are very active, and they keep me posted, and it seems like it's really a wonderful place to live and to awaken.
Now, Dallas is a good place, and I feel like I've been here since 97, and I feel like, you know, I kind of came in when the energy really started to shift from, you know, they get on my case because I talk bad about Dallas, you know, but from a pretty Bible-thumping kind of place to a much more spiritually open location, you know, so it's all good.
Well, Texas itself sometimes has a bad rep, but, you know, reps are not always deserved. And and even, you know, if there are a lot of people who are, we'll just say, still asleep or still kind of locked in a way of thinking that maybe isn't really working, the fact is there are a lot of people in Dallas and everywhere in the world who are beginning to look at life and themselves in a new way. And the more of us that begin to do that, the more the momentum builds. And I know in Dallas in particular that is especially true with all of the consciousness projects and the oneness projects that are taking place there. I mean, to me, it really is one of the great spots in this country where experiments are taking place and people are using modern technology to get the message out like you are here. And so I have to agree with you. I think Dallas is an amazing place, and I can't wait to come back.
Cool. James, we haven't ever had you on the show, and when I have a new guest on, I'd like to have them tell their story so my listeners can get familiar. One of the things about this show is that your interview is held in archive, and so if there's someone that listens to you down the road on a different interview, they can always go back and listen to the archive. So maybe tell us a little bit about yourself. How'd you get here?
Well, it's always an interesting question, you know, to look back and say, well, where did this begin, or what are the benchmarks? And I have to say that for me, one of the major benchmarks, if not the major one, was something that happened 25 years ago this year. And that was a gathering that took place in Assisi, Italy. Most people know Assisi for being the home of St. Francis of Assisi, probably one of the most beloved Catholic saints in history. And it was because of his dedication to peace that a gathering took place there in 1986. When the leaders of the 12 major religions of the world came to Assisi, it was the first time ever in history that the leaders of so many different religions came together, and they didn't come together to talk or to argue or discuss. They came together simply to pray, and what they did was each one of them brought the peace prayer from their religion, and there was an enormous gathering led by the Pope and the Dalai Lama and all of the other different leaders where they each prayed the peace prayer from their tradition. Now, that may seem like an innocuous gathering or maybe even inconsequential, but to me, it was the beginning of something really profound because it showed that we're willing to stop focusing on the ways that we're different and begin to focus on how we are the same. And when it comes to religion and spirituality, every religious path has a peace prayer. So to use this as this common sort of ground, I thought was a very important step. What happened for me and how this impacted my life was a friend of mine was there. He brought those peace prayers home and gave me a copy of them. And I remember as I read them, something that felt truly remarkable and miraculous happened, which was that I actually heard music as I read each one of these prayers, beginning with the Hindu prayer. And at first, quite honestly, I didn't even know where it was coming from, but I picked up my guitar and began to play along and realized that what I was listening to were it was the music for each one of these prayers. And so I began to write the music down, and I just began to sing these songs and play them on my guitar, one after another, the Hindu prayer, the Buddhist prayer, the Christian prayer, until 1 hour later I had put all 12 of them to music. Now, I've been a songwriter most of my life, but I'd never had an experience quite like that. And I knew that I had not been given this just for me. I knew that this was a gift that I was meant to share. So people immediately began to call me the Peace Troubadour, and that kind of stuck. And I just started traveling around there in the beginning, just playing these prayers to whoever would listen, sometimes very small groups. And this was a time back in the mid-'90s when the Balkan War was really raging. And so I decided that a peace troubadour should be willing to go to where peace is needed. And I actually sent a letter out to all the peace and humanitarian organizations that I could find in Croatia and Bosnia and throughout that whole region. And only one of them responded, and they invited me to come and to share this concert all throughout that whole region. And I went. This is now in July of 1995, and I traveled all throughout the Balkan region sharing these prayers in this peace concert and talking about peace and sharing from my heart. And it was really amazing. I mean, here I am in this country at war. And one of the things that I've always said every time I've been in a situation like that, and it's been many, is that I've never really found the war. No matter where I am, whether it be Iraq or Israel, Northern Ireland, I've never really found the war. Instead, what I've always found are really amazing, dedicated people like everyone listening to this show. I always find people, of course, like me. And I don't mean that in an egotistical way. What I mean is that we always see what we project. And when we live from this place, when we are being the change that we want to see in the world, then we literally see that change in the world. And this is what I was finding as I would travel around to these countries. I was meeting amazing people who were as dedicated as I was, even when I was also meeting people who seemed to have different opinions or a different approach. Still, we could find that common ground, and that common ground was peace. And I remember when I was in Croatia, I actually heard about this secret community or spiritual community in the mountains there near Bosnia, and that they were called the Emissaries of Light. And this was a community, a very ancient lineage that has been around, but very much in secret for over 2,000 years. And I won't go too much into that, but I basically traveled into the mountains to be with these people, and this became the subject of my first book, which was called Emissary of Light. And Emissary of Light came out pretty much right after Celestine Prophecy did, and because people, I think, were just loving this whole spiritual adventure genre, the book did extremely well, and suddenly I found myself not just being this peace troubadour, but writing books, ultimately making movies. We produced a film called Indigo, as well as 3 others. And then came a movie. This, I think, will segue into more of what I know you want to talk about. Then there came a movie that a lot of people were watching. It was getting a lot of attention a few years ago. It was a movie called The Secret. And I'm sure everybody listening has probably seen or heard about or read the book. And I remember the first time I saw it, which was when it first came out, I remember watching it thinking two thoughts. One, that I was excited that this was a very well-done film, and I knew that it was going to get a lot of attention, and that it would be a good first step for a lot of people. That was my first thought. But then right behind that was something that really scared me, because the way that The Secret was made, in my opinion, it was made almost as if this was the most important spiritual law that you could learn, the law of attraction. And that once you get this, once you realize that you attract everything that you experience into your life, at least on some level, once you get that, that's pretty much all you really need. And I knew that there were going to be a lot of new people who had never been exposed to any spiritual depth that were going to hear this. and they were going to misinterpret it, and they would begin to think that spirituality is about good rather than goodness, and that it's about what I can get rather than what I can give. And spirituality would ultimately be measured by how big my house is or how nice my car is, and this was a really scary thought, and yet I began to see this happening all over with people who were watching The Secret. And so I felt very strong right there at the beginning that this conversation needed to continue. So it's not that there was anything wrong with The Secret, it's just that it was a first step, and it was a conversation that began and shouldn't end there. It was a conversation that we should continue. And so I basically was inspired at that point to write a book called The Moses Code. And The Moses Code is really about bringing spirit and soul back into the law of attraction. The subtitle of the book is The Most Powerful Manifestation Tool in the History of the World. I remember when I came up with that, I thought, wow, I mean, that's a pretty big statement, the most powerful in the history of the world. So I knew I had to back it up, and I won't go into all those details, but one time after another, these miracles were happening that showed me that this really was a powerful technology, but it was about what I like to call soul manifestation as opposed to ego manifestation. And really the difference is simple. Ego manifestation is when we look out and see what we don't have, and then we try and use this universal energy to get it. Spiritual or soul manifestation is when we look out and we realize what seems to be lacking in our world, and we, instead of reaching out to get it, we reach out to give it. Very, very subtle but very important difference. It is like the prayer of St. Francis says, it is in giving that we receive. So when we become the source of this for another, this is where the power of manifestation really is. And this is what we tried to say in the Moses Code. It ultimately became a film. In fact, I'll stop talking in a second here because I know you have a lot of questions, but I'll just say one final thing about that. It was really interesting when we were producing the movie. As I said before, this really all began with my feelings around The Secret. I spent about a year working on the film. People like Debbie Ford and Neil Donald Walsh and many others who were really helping me. And after about a year of working on it, it was finished, and I showed it to a number of people, and they watched it, and when I asked what they thought, they said, well, it's okay. And I remember saying, okay, wow, I mean, I didn't work a year on this thing for it to be okay. And they just said, well, it doesn't have the impact. It doesn't have the pop that we were hoping. And one of the people that was there and who was saying this said to me, he's actually a well-known filmmaker, and he said, if you give me 2 weeks and you and I work together day and night, I believe that in 2 weeks we could make this a great film. We could do whatever it takes to make this a fantastic film. And I remember it was a hard decision because part of me just wanted to be done with it, but I said yes. And this gentleman and I, we worked day and night for 2 weeks. By the time we were done, by the time 2 weeks was up, I think we had reshot 75, maybe 70% of the film. We had re-edited 100%, rescored 100%. I mean, it was a new film, all in 2 weeks. And it was fantastic. I was so happy. And the interesting thing was the guy that I'm talking about, his name is Drew Harriet, and, of course, he was the director of The Secret. So it's just poetic justice, I think, that this whole project started with me having this angst for the shallowness of this film, The Secret, and yet it was the director of that film that kind of was a major part of me continuing this conversation. So anyway, I know that was a very, very long answer to your question, but that at least gets us heading in the right direction so people know that this is where I came from, and I think this is where we're all heading.
And I agree with you, your commentary about The Secret. It left people with the belief that, if I wished enough, if I prayed enough, if I thought enough about having that new car, I'm going to get the new car. And I feel like it also left them kind of disappointed because they weren't getting the new car or the new job or the new boyfriend or those things that they wanted, because you're right, it was an introduction to the whole concept, but it was missing pieces, in my opinion. So, anyway.
In fact, to even go further, one of the things that I've often said is that even when it works, it doesn't work. In other words, even when you do attract the thing that you think you want, even then it doesn't work. So, for example, let's say that you wanted to attract a new Mercedes, and you did everything that The Secret says. You did a vision board, whatever the tools are that they use, you did all of those things. And then, say, a month later, there is the car in your driveway. Now, the thing to remember is that this always begins with this feeling or this longing that we sense within ourselves, like there's something that's missing. And we feel this longing, and then we project it out, and we might think, well, if I only had a nicer car or a better job, then maybe this feeling would dissipate. So I decide upon what it is I want, this new car. I do all these things, and because the ego does have a particularly strong power of manifestation, let's say it works. And for about a week, you feel like, wow, it worked, and I don't feel that longing anymore. And it's kind of like the new car smell. After a little while, it begins to fade. And after a little while, that longing, that feeling starts to come back. And you're like, wow, I thought I did something with it, and here it is again. So maybe it's a bigger house that I need, or a better husband, and this is what the ego does. And this is why I call this ego manifestation, is because the ego is constantly looking outside itself to try and find what it doesn't have or what it needs. And I actually love the line from A Course in Miracles when it says that the job of the ego is to seek but to never find. Its job is to seek, but it looks in the one place where it cannot be found. Because the truth is, what you're looking for can only be found within yourself. Now, soul manifestation is all about how do I manifest or how do I release what is within me already. Perhaps it's been hidden, perhaps it's been blocked, but the way to unleash that is to become the source of that to another. And it's very simple. The reason is because you cannot give something you don't have. And it is in the giving of this thing, whatever this thing is, it is in the giving of this that you realize it's always been within you. Or like Dorothy discovers in The Wizard of Oz, that she never left home. It's always been there. And so I think this is one of the most important lessons of our day, is not to try and use spirituality to get, but to use it to give and to be the source and the blessing of that to others. And I think, the whole collapse of the economic system and everything that many of us are experiencing comes from this misinterpretation. And I think the release that we're looking for, the salvation we're looking for, is going to come when we turn this back around and give it back to the soul.
But sometimes people don't even recognize that they're being given a gift. Okay, I'm going to share a quick story, and I'm going to preface this that people that know me personally don't even laugh. So recently, my car rolled backwards into a ravine and was totaled.
Ouch.
Literally.
I hope
into
you were
a ravine. Oh, no. And people are like, well, it's your fault. I'm like, wait a minute. I wasn't even near the car. I was in Starbucks getting a coffee, okay? I wasn't even near the car. But it forced me to have to go buy a new car, which probably if it had not rolled in the ravine, no new car.
Mm-hmm.
So that manifestation thing works in weird ways. Because I got a really good amount of money from the insurance company for my kind of old car, which made it be okay. It was a win-win situation. I got a new car.
Yeah.
I wasn't hurt. It was in a ravine. I got a great story out of it. I mean, whose car rolls into a freaking ravine?
Well, it was definitely karma on your part that brought that about. But, you also brought up a very interesting, you touched on a very interesting point, which is I think one of the problems with the philosophy that we hear getting flung around, and I say flung purposefully because with so many people, these are concepts that they understand perhaps a little bit with their minds, but they don't really understand it with that deeper, more profound part of themselves. And so they fling around statements like, well, you created this, or what did you do to manifest that in your life? And so what happens is when we understand something with our mind but not our soul, we use the very thing that is meant to bring us more spirituality, and we use it as an attack. And so we actually have heard this a lot from people, like attacking people by saying, well, you obviously deserved this, or you obviously created this. And the fact is, my experience of The Secret and so many other things is that this is like first grade, right? And it's fine to be in first grade. There's nothing wrong with being in first grade, but you don't want to think you're in graduate school when you're in first grade. You want to realize that you're at the first step, not the last step. And when you believe that you're in graduate school, when in reality you're in first grade, then there's a very strong possibility that you're going to hurt people or yourself. I actually know people, a very dear friend of mine, for example, who, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and despite all of the encouragement from her doctors and her family and her friends to seek medical attention and balance it with holistic work, she decided, no, I'm going to do what they said in The Secret. I'm going to just get happy movies, and I'm going to watch happy movies and eat well, and I'm going to do what they said in The Secret. Well, she died, and because she didn't have a deeper understanding, and I see this happening so often. These are great lessons, but sometimes the lessons are not as much to teach us where we are, but maybe to teach us where we're not, and how much deeper this ocean goes. Like one of the analogies that I've often used is that a child can collect seashells, and they can collect lovely little things at the shore where still very shallow. But it's only when we are mature and we're able to go out and dive to the deepest part where the real treasure is. But we can't do that as children. We have to grow. We have to mature. And this is very true spiritually as well. So I believe that when we take this great law, the law of attraction, and we apply it as we've been doing here in the Moses Code to the soul rather than just what the ego thinks it wants or thinks that it needs, it allows us to mature, and it allows us to be the source of goodness rather than trying just to attract goods into our lives. And I think this is what's going to change the world. This is why I'm so passionate about this discussion, because I think that this is really the energy that we're discovering now, and as more and more of us activate in our lives, I think we're going to see this happening in the world in really dramatic and amazing ways.
2 minutes till the music comes up, so let's just kind of put out a little teaser. The book that we're going to hopefully we'll even get through this, the Moses Code. I have to tell you, Moses, probably my favorite biblical character, and so this book deals with the law of attraction. But Moses? Did Moses use the law of attraction?
He sure did, yeah. Moses was one of the great champions of the law of attraction. And I don't know if you want to get into that yet or if we want to just leave people on the cliff. But in many ways, I think we could make an argument for the fact that it starts with Moses. And we have to understand what it is that Moses understood. In particular, we need to understand the real meaning of his conversation with God, what God said to him there at that burning bush, and how Moses harnessed the energy of what he learned there to manifest some of the greatest miracles in the history of the world. And so, yes, absolutely, Moses is where it all began.
It's where it all began, and that music's going to start up in 1 second. Oh, there it is. So we're going to go take a quick commercial break. I'm Dr. Rita Louise. We're talking to James Twyman. His webpage is jamestwyman.com. His book, The Moses Code, and actually his new book, The Barn Band. And we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rita Louise, the founder of the Institute of Applied Energetics. Start a new career today on the leading edge of alternative health and healing. The Institute of Applied Energetics can help you to develop the specialized skills you'll need to work as an energy medicine practitioner, intuitive counselor, or professional medical intuitive. Besides our outstanding technical instruction, our programs also support you in creating and building a successful business in this rapidly growing field. Be a catalyst for changing the way healthcare is done around the world. Contact the Institute of Applied Energetics right away or visit appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. Balance in all things is critical to maintaining health. In the hectic drive of today's world, many of us forget to take care of our most important asset, ourselves. At ProductsForTheSoul.com, we want to support your effort to nurture yourself. We offer a wide variety of herbs, supplements, and high-quality, ready-to-eat, all-natural foods. We even offer holographic chip technology products that can augment the body's natural ability to increase energy, improve sleep, and mitigate pain. Best of all of our products are delivered straight to your door. It's time to start loving yourself. Visit ProductsForTheSoul.com and let us help you along the way.
And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and we're here talking with James Twyman about his book, The Moses Code. James, before we went to break, we kind of started talking about Moses and what he knew and what he didn't know. So what did Moses know? He was a cool guy.
Yeah. I think he's definitely left a pretty interesting legacy. But let's back up a little bit, and so we can understand why this all traces back to this character played by Charlton Heston. And
next week is Easter, so I think this is extremely timely. Well, actually, and Passover starts Monday.
That's right. Yeah. So I think it all really comes together, and it's a very auspicious time to be talking about this. And I think most people have at least heard the story of Moses and how he was born an Israelite slave in Egypt at a very difficult time when actually the Pharaoh, when Moses was a very small child or baby, passed a terrible law that we can't even begin to relate to. He basically was so afraid that the Israelite population was growing too fast that he passed a law saying that every male slave under 5 had to be killed. I mean, this is genocide, the type that would appall us today. But then, it probably wasn't even that unusual. And this is when Moses was alive, and clearly Moses' mother did not want this to happen, so the story is that she put him into a little basket and floated him down the Nile. Now, whether it was by coincidence or on purpose, I think it was probably on purpose. This basket floated to an area where members of the royal family were swimming or bathing. And one of them was a daughter of the Pharaoh who was without child herself. And she found this basket and decided to take Moses as her own child. So Moses was raised to believe that he was an Egyptian and a member of the royal family. And yet there was always something within him that resonated with and connected with the slaves that he saw around him all the time. And one day when he was a young adult, he saw one of the Egyptian soldiers abusing one of these slaves, and he was so angry and outraged that he actually killed the soldier. Now, even a member of the royal family was going to be held accountable for something like this, and so he decided that his only choice was to escape and to leave Egypt and to go into the desert, where we're told he lived for 40 years. He ends up marrying, and he gives up all of his prestige of being, this rich kid from the royal family and becomes a shepherd. And now he's an old man. Let's say he's 60. Now, 60 to us may not feel that old, but to people of that time, 60 was, ancient. I mean, very few people lived to be 60 years old back then. And he was tending his sheep on Mount Horeb when he saw something that he didn't understand. And what he saw was a bush that seemed to be on fire, and yet the fire did not consume the bush. But most importantly, he felt a presence, and he heard a voice, or felt a voice. I mean, who knows exactly how it happened? But basically, whatever this presence was, it asked him to do something that seemed absolutely impossible. This voice asked him to go to the most powerful man in the world, his uncle, the Pharaoh, because now we're talking about Ramses the Great, the new Pharaoh, who was particularly known for his, for many things, including his violence. And he's to go to this man, and he's to tell him that the one God, of course, not the polytheistic God that the most Egyptians believed in, but the one God wants him to release his entire population of slaves. And Moses hears this, and like I'm sure we would think if we were told, let's say that we go in our backyard and we see a burning bush that says that we're to go to the President of the United States and to tell him to end the war in Iraq. Well, that means we're kind of well for Barack Obama, but maybe not so much for the bush that we had, a different kind of burning bush that we had about, a few years ago. Maybe it wouldn't have gone so well, and at the very least we would have thought, why are we being asked to do something like this? It seems so impossible. Well, this is what Moses obviously felt. In fact, what Moses did, though, was very interesting. You have to remember that at this point in biblical history, there was no name for God. God was known really more as a title than anything else, like God Almighty or the God of Abraham. But, that was more of a title like Mr. or Your Highness rather than what comes when we know someone's name, which is more of an intimate connection. So what Moses basically says to God is, if you want me to do this impossible thing, you need to tell me something. What is your name? Or who shall I say sent me? And in this moment, this is where the Moses Code really is delivered. And Moses doesn't understand it at first, but he ultimately will. God says to Moses in that moment, in Hebrew, he says, Ehyeh Asher Ehyeh, which we usually translate as, I am that I am. Now, I remember growing up, hearing this story, hearing this name, I am that I am, and of course not really understanding it. To me, it's just like this long sentence, it's kind of cryptic. And I never really understood that it was more of a formula than it was anything else. I'm going to save that for just 1 second because I want to go back and finish off the story of Moses. Basically, when Moses is given the name, he knows that he has something very powerful in his possession. He knows that he knows the name of God at this point, and yet he still wonders, how am I going to do this? And he says to God at this point, even Abraham and Isaac couldn't do what you're asking me to do. And in this moment, God says, yes, I know, but to Abraham and Isaac I did not give my name. So what God is telling Moses, is that I'm giving you something that no one has ever had before. If you can learn to harness the energy of I am that I am, you will understand the real truth and the real secret of manifestation. Well, I was meditating about this a number of years ago, just kind of meditating on the name, when it was almost as if I were to make this visual, I would say that it was like there was this comet that burst out of the sky, and it kind of landed in the middle of this name. And when I looked again, it was no longer just I am that I am, but it was I am that, comma, I am. So I realized that the Moses Code is a comma. And when we put the comma in the right place, we realize that what God is really saying is that we are to claim that which we are. I am that. In other words, we aren't saying I want that or I hope to achieve that. The power of the Moses Code is when we say I am that. Whatever that is, it is what I am, because I am claiming my oneness with the divine. And if I am one with the divine, if I am one with God, then all things are mine, and as I claim them through the energy of this name, they are automatically drawn to me. Now, the interesting thing about the name, when we look at it in that way, I am that, comma, I am, I usually say it's like a conversation with God. And when we say this, when we feel this state of oneness, and when we claim it and we say, I am that, God always answers by saying, I am. I am that, I am. In other words, God doesn't say, yes, you are that. God says, I am. In other words, I am seeing this oneness and I'm claiming it with and through you. Now, the interesting thing, two things, first of all, is that almost immediately, I think that the establishment, the Jewish population, the hierarchy, realized just how powerful this was. They realized just what they had, and almost immediately the name was made blasphemous. You could not say the name, and in fact, in many circles, to say the name of God resulted in being stoned to death. And so the energy of this code was suppressed. And yet at the same time, we do see certain people who would emerge who would use the Moses Code, and most of us have read this, and we just didn't understand what it was we were reading. Of course, the main person would be Jesus. There are many times throughout the canonical Gospels where we read about Jesus using the Moses Code. In fact, I'll just give one example. When he's talking about tearing down the temple and rebuilding it in 3 days, and he says to the people, before Moses was, I am. The next line is that they picked up stones to kill him because they realized that he had in fact, he had not only said the name, he claimed it. Basically what Jesus said is, I am that, I am God, I am the divine. And this is why I'm able to create miracles. So Jesus was the full representation of the I am presence, or what we call the Moses Code. And we can each do this as well. I mean, the Moses Code book and the movie are really all about how do we claim this ourselves. Of course, we're going to talk about all of this when I come to Dallas, and we'll be throughout Texas. But it really is about how do we claim this? How do we use the most powerful manifestation tool in history to not just attract, goods or cars or houses? How do we use it to change our lives and to change the world like Moses did or like Jesus did? So once again, that was a very long answer to show why this all really goes back to Moses. In my mind, Moses was the initiator of what we sometimes call the law of attraction, but not from the shallow perspective of the ego. Moses understood that this was a divine gift, and that if we use it with great humility, if we use it in service, it changes not only our lives, but it also changes the world, just as he did.
One of the things that kind of gets me when people talk about the law of manifestation is about claiming things like the big house and the car. It always seems so material. And, you were talking about the ego and the soul, and like it would be so ego-based versus actually having the soul drive us forward, like I'm sure Moses in that moment where he was like, okay, I guess I'm going to go into the Egypt and have a little chat with the Pharaoh, wasn't really his choice in going. And I guess my question is, how do people separate what is actually their soul driving them forward to the things that are for their highest good versus their ego going, oh, but I'd really rather have a Mercedes?
That is such a great question. You know, what's funny, when you were asking that, I've never really thought of this before, but I kind of imagined Moses realizing what he had just been given, realizing the power within this code that he had, and said, you know what, I'll see you guys later. I'm going to go off and use this to build a mansion. Or I'm going to use this to get me back in good with the royal family so I can have those, you know, all that richness again. I mean, clearly, if Moses had done that, we wouldn't be telling his story 3,500 years later. What Moses did was very different. He looked out and he said, how may I use this to serve? Knowing that as we reach out and serve others, as we become the manifestation of the I Am presence, we realize that I cannot give anything to anyone without also receiving it myself, because this is how it works, right? Jesus said the same thing when he said, seek first the kingdom of God and everything you need will be given to you. Jesus didn't say, you know, do the secret and, you know, make a vision board and you'll get everything you need. Jesus said, become the source of this. Seek one thing. Seek to be the presence. And then everything will come to you naturally. And I think this is really the key. And I completely agree with you. And this is what we were saying before about a very beginning level of an understanding of this. When we first get something like this, we begin saying, well, what's in it for me? I mean, what can I get, you know, what can I manifest in my life using this? I think the next step is when we realize the deeper lesson, which is how do I use this to become part of this amazing evolution that is sweeping across this planet? How do I use this to serve, knowing that the more I do that, the more it's going to be coming right back to me? So that really is, I think, the key. You know, this is how we know the difference is, well, the difference is really felt within ourselves. And it's like I said before, even when you do attract those things, it doesn't really solve the initial problem. It doesn't make that longing disappear. That longing, of course, is this sense of separation that we feel from within ourselves, between each other, and, of course, with God. It doesn't do anything to solve that most critical issue. But when we become the source of goodness to others, we find that part of us relaxing. We find that longing beginning to ease because we are back in the flow of grace. And it's when we are in the flow of grace that grace fills our life. I mean, it really is that simple.
What kinds of things keep people from being in that flow?
Well, I would say misunderstanding, misplacement, meaning, just as we were saying before, the idea, well, think of it this way. If you lost something that you dearly loved and you spent, well, let's say that you lost it inside your house. You misplaced it somewhere inside your house, but you spent all of your time searching for it in the yard outside. So there you are outside. You're looking for hours, even days. You could look all you want, but you're never going to find it. But the moment you give up the search and go back inside and you sit down and you finally surrender and say, I'm not going to look anymore, in that moment, do you look next to you, and there it is, because it was never outside. It was never hidden. So what the ego does, you know, we throw around this word ego. The ego is basically that part of us that believes that it is separate from everything else. What the ego does is it wants us to be looking for it in the wrong place. So what I always say is that the beginning of the spiritual process is to surrender, is to give up, to realize that you do not know. and to stop looking. And when you do that, the thing that you thought you were lacking appears right in front of you because it was never lacking. The beauty of the Moses Code is that if there's something that you need, like let's say compassion, or let's say it's love, if there's something like that that you feel lacking in your life, the surest way for it to appear is to give it away, to become the source of love for another, to show compassion to another. Once again, you can't give something that you don't have. And when you begin to do that, you realize, wow, I was mistaken. So this is why I think it's just a misunderstanding. We've been sold a bill of goods. We've been told by all these so-called spiritual teachers that if you look hard enough on the outside of your house, you're going to find it. Real spirituality is when we say, stop looking. Go back inside. Just stop and hold still for a moment. And when you do that, I promise you, the thing that you thought you didn't have appears right in front of you.
Isn't it just amazing how that works?
It sure is. It really is amazing. The barn dance.
This is a good question. Barn dance. Oh, yeah. Well, I'm just like, I don't know. That might be a whole comeback for a different day.
I think it is. We got to do a big discussion here with the Moses Code, but I'm glad we did because it's such an important subject. But yeah, the barn dance definitely is a book that was very.
We have about 6 or 7 minutes, so lay it on me. So what's it about?
Well, what I'll
Tell me all
say
about
to begin is that we're going to definitely be talking about this a lot when I do come to Dallas and when I do come to Texas. So I'm going to try and balance this discussion of soul manifestation with an experience that I had through, the book that I wrote called The Barn Dance. And essentially, the book, it begins with a great tragedy that I experienced and that everyone in my family experienced when my former wife, Linda, who I'd married when I was very young, we have a daughter together. She was always my best friend. We were extremely close. And about 5.5 years ago, Linda was murdered in Chicago. And thus began a journey that is not one that any of us really think we're going to ever have to endure. I mean, this is something that we read about in the newspaper or see on television, but we never think it's going to happen to someone that we love. Now, what I'll just say about this to begin is that grief is such an important process, and it's not something that we can spiritual away. In other words, we can't use spiritual concepts to work through these things. This is a deep, profound process of awakening that we can only experience when we are brave enough to go through it. When we had this happen in our lives, there were so many people who would come to us and say things like, well, you know that Linda created this or whatever. And part of me just wanted to, scream at them and say, why are you trying to use spiritual concepts that you don't even understand to try and get me through something that I just simply need to feel here? So on one hand, we've been spending this entire time today talking about, I think, one of the most important spiritual experiences in the world today. But we cannot use these things to bypass these very human experiences as well. Something like I experienced in the book that I wrote, The Barn Dance, it was a very human experience, but it led to a depth and an understanding that is so powerful and so important that I could never have gotten any other way. Of course, I would choose to undo this if I could. I would love to learn it in some other way. But the fact of the matter is, sometimes we find ourselves in these situations, and we can't, practice metaphysical malpractice and just think that we can just get through them by wishing it away. We have to dive into it. And so, in a nutshell, of course, the book is a fantastic journey where I experienced this in a very direct way, and people, I think, would love the book. In fact, I'll just say this one thing. I've never read a book, I've never written a book, and this is my 15th, that I think 60 to 70% of the people who read it in one sitting. They can't put it down. Of course, as an author, that's an exciting thing to hear. but it's not really, I don't think it's so much about my writing style. I think it's more that this book is connecting with people in a very important way, and they're sensing something of their own journey in this. So obviously we don't have too much time to go into it, but I am very excited about this book, and I think if you haven't read it yet, you'll enjoy it. I think you'll love it. I've never actually said that about a book that I've written. I've never been so bold as to say, go out and read this, because I promise you'll love it and you'll get a lot out of it. But I will say that with the Barn Dance.
But I think people can feel your passion and your pain. They can feel you even through your words. You know, it's being transmitted out there, and they're living it with you.
Well, I remember when I first wrote the book, I showed it to my family first, my daughter, of course, and my parents, because we were all very close to Linda, and this was a very intimate thing. And I am very real in this book, to the point that a lot of the things I wrote are not things I'm proud of. And my father read that, and he said, you can't write about some of this stuff. I mean, you don't really look so great in some of these situations. And what I said to him is, I have to. Number one, it's part of my healing to be transparent in this, but also the more people can relate to me as a human being, the more they're going to get out of my story, or the more they're going to learn. And that's why it's important for me to be vulnerable and not to play a role, you know, the spiritual teacher or the spiritual author. That's a role. But the real me is no different than anyone else. I'm learning these lessons just like you are, and I'm experiencing this in a very deep way. And if people can relate to me, then they're going to get much more out of it.
Great. Very cool. Let's see. I'm looking at the clock. We have about 2 more minutes. What's up and coming for you, James, other than you're going to be in Dallas in May?
I just finished a new book, which is called Love, God, and the Art of French Cooking. That will be out in December. Also, in October, I mentioned this peace gathering in Assisi. This is the 25th anniversary, so I'm going to be taking about 40 people. We're going to be walking through the Italian countryside for 10 days to arrive in Assisi the day that they're having this celebration happening again. The leaders are coming back to Assisi, and we're going to be there. I'll be doing a major concert there during that event, so I'm very excited about that. But I'm excited to be coming there to Texas, so I hope everyone will come out to Unity in Dallas it's the 15th, I believe, of May, and then also Houston and San Antonio and Austin, and of course people can go to my website, jamestwyman.com, if they want to get more information on those events, or, you know, there's music, there's all sorts of stuff there that I think people would enjoy.
Lots of good stuff. Well, when your new book comes out, we'll have to have your peeps contact my peeps, and we'll get you back on, and we can, spend more than 2 minutes talking about it.
I would love that. I think that'll be a lot of fun.
Wrong one. Okay. Thanks, James. You have a great weekend, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. All right. Bye. That was James Twyman. His website is jamestwyman.com. We talked about his book, The Moses Code, and sort of touched on the barn dance, which sounds wonderful. And we'll be back with Jesse Ventura after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.